It's election day across Oklahoma. Good evening from the Oklahoman. I'm Dave Morris, and the polls have closed across the state on various races from the county, city, and state level. Joining me to break it down are my colleagues Carmen Foreman, Kayla Branch, and as always, Chris Castile. Good to see everybody.
Good to see you, Dave.
Me here.
This election day across the state, a little bit different in some ways than others. There is still pizza on election night. It is a newsroom journalism tradition, but it's being delivered this time versus at our cubicles in the office. And number two, on a serious note, though, with the COVID-19 coronavirus across the state, that could affect voter turnouts. And Kayla, I'll turn to you. What were we thinking leading into today the voter turnout might be? I'm assuming a little bit lower.
I think that is to be expected, specifically because so many absentee ballots were requested. And so I think folks are preparing to see less people. Just because of safety precautions, folks are worried when you're in a polling place, whether that is at a bank or a library or wherever it may be, that those can get crowded. So I think people were expecting to maybe see a little bit less in terms of physical turnout, but at the same time, there are some serious issues that are on the ballot, specifically State Question 802, which would expand Medicaid. And a lot of people are really interested in that. So maybe that increases voter turnout. So right now it's still kind of up in the air, but I think folks were expecting to see more ballots just mailed in rather than people showing up.
I think I saw the number of over 120,000 absentee ballots were turned in, and 75% of that might have been mailed in advance. So a lot of people did that. Speaking of the serious topic of coronavirus, that affected some of the things that voters saw when they went to the polls. Masks were certainly encouraged, along with pens and the safety of cleansing those pens when you went into your ballot area to cast your votes. You mentioned State Question 802, and Carmen, that's a story you're covering.
You mentioned the absentee ballots, and I think maybe one of the bigger takeaways from the absentee ballots and the absentee in-person vote is that we saw more Democrats casting absentee ballots than Republicans. And, it's not always a without fail Democrats vote for Medicaid expansion, but you can assume that the majority of those Democrats have voted in favor of Medicaid expansion, State Question 802. So really the question is today is how much, the GOP folks are going to turn out at the polls. And, we've seen President Trump tweet to sort of like illegitimize mail-in voting. And so I've seen some national media stories that have basically said that Republicans have tended to shy away from mail-in voting because of, the president saying, oh, it may not be as reliable. But those GOP voters and a lot of GOP voters tend to be older folks that vote every single election cycle. So, while Democrats were leading the absentee vote, I would expect that more Republicans will cast their ballots today in person.
Guys, on State Question 802, what were we hearing on how voter turnout could affect that? More turnouts in favor of it, lesser turnout, maybe not?
More turnout in favor of it. And sort of what I had heard from political analysts and stuff is that they expected that turnout as a whole would be equal to that of 2018 when the 788 medical marijuana question was on the ballot. So they expected it to be about the same. And if it is about the same, that would work in favor of State Question 802.
Well, if I remember correctly, that state question actually brought a lot of people out to vote during that election. It wouldn't be election night at the Oklahoma if Chris Castile wasn't involved. And Chris, how many years have we had an election update, whether you were in Washington, D.C. or here in Oklahoma City? It's been a long time, right?
It's been a long time, so as long as you've been doing them, Dave. I would say that's how long I've been on.
I think you're exactly right. And the lady producing this, Paige Dillard, she's been there every step of the way. Chris, perhaps one of the big races you're covering tonight, the congressional district race for 5th District.
Yeah, yes, exactly. First, I wanted to comment on the turnout. I had not heard that people are expecting the same amount of turnout as we saw in 2018, because besides marijuana, which was huge, you also had a lot of huge statewide races on the ballot that year. You had the Republican primary for governor, for one thing, on the ballot, but almost all of the statewide offices were on the ballot in 2018 as well. So I was going to caution about, using 2018 as a comparison point for 2020, even with Medicaid expansion. But, those comparisons are rough and a lot of conjecture involved in those anyway. But yeah, the 5th District tonight, that's what I'm watching most closely. There are 4 leading candidates, Republican candidates, hoping to take on Kendra Horn in the fall. Terry Neese, State Senator Stephanie Bice, businessman David Hill, former school superintendent Janet Barisi. And Bice, I think the last time we talked, I was predicting that Bice would be one of the 2 to make the runoff because there's almost certainly going to be one. But she has been the target of $350,000 in negative ads in a week. And so it'll be interesting to see, how she stands up against that. She did defend herself against it, but that's a lot of money to spend in a week against somebody in a race that, in a runoff that could be decided by a few points. It'd be interesting to see how the Republican electorate responded to some of those attacks.
That runoff would be in August, and then the general election in November. And this was a race that we saw a lot of fundraising back when Kendra Horn won the seat over Steve Russell, I believe. I would assume that a lot of money will be pumped into this race as we head towards November. Yeah,
there'll be millions that come from out-of-state groups in this. A lot of dark money, a lot of party money, which is public money. There will just be, what the candidates spend themselves will be a lot. I think Representative Horn already has close to $3 million. It'll still be dwarfed probably by what these groups spend, but it won't be a concern for whatever Republican candidate emerges in August, whether they've totally depleted their funds, trying to win the nomination. Their coffers will fill up quickly and they will have a lot of support. The Republicans really want this seat back. Democrats really want to defend it.
And we'll end this with Kayla Branch. Before I ask each one of you what your favorite pizza is, Kayla, one of the races you're following tonight here in Oklahoma County is for the sheriff.
Yeah, that's definitely the race that I am keeping my eye on moving through the day and into the night. There are 5 candidates for Oklahoma County Sheriff, including the sitting Sheriff, P.D. Taylor. And there are 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. So we're watching both sides of the aisle in this primary. And it's really interesting because of the environment that we're in right now, the nationwide, the worldwide protests against police brutality, and have had, folks looking at local law enforcement, wondering what kind of reforms can be made. So that's in the backdrop, as well as the fact that 3 of the candidates are Black men, and Oklahoma County has never had a Black sheriff. So moving forward, this is going to be a historic vote that happens. And it'll be really interesting to see kind of where voters want to take Oklahoma County going into the future in terms of the different platforms that people have and what they've said they want to do in terms of reforming the local sheriff's office in response to concerns about police brutality.
Lots of interesting races to follow all night tonight. Of course, my colleagues, Carmen, Kayla, and Chris, among those covering the races that you can follow on Oklahoman.com. We'll have the election results as well as stories and social media feeds. A live article can be found online as well. And again, I mentioned that pizza in the newsroom, that'll be not in the newsroom, but delivered. Favorite slices of pizza, guys?
I'm a cheese girl all the way, plain and simple.
I went with Supreme, but I'll eat pretty much anything. Like, I like the weird pizza from like Empire Slice House. That's good stuff too.
Chris?
I'm pretty objective on that, Dave. I don't want to really, show my hand on. The older I get, probably the fewer ingredients that I order on pizza from an indigestion standpoint.
There you have it, people. Where are you going to get this sort of analysis and context? Again, election coverage throughout tonight on Oklahoman.com, including this roundtable discussion a couple times throughout the evening. For producer Paige Dillard, I'm Dave Morris with the Oklahoman, and thanks so much for tuning in.